The morning air reeked of burnt coffee and tension. I stood outside the conference room, smoothing the hem of my navy blue dress. It was clean, pressed, professional, everything a senior analyst should wear to a Monday morning meeting. But apparently, it wasn't expensive enough. My boss, Harold Crane, glanced up from his espresso, eyes dripping with disdain. He let his gaze travel from my shoes to my collar, lingering with obvious disgust. The room was full, 12 executives, all watching. "Next time you wear something that cheap, don't bother coming in," he said loudly. The room went silent. The other executives stared at their laptops, pretending not to hear. My throat tightened. I had worked 12-hour days for 2 years, sacrificed weekends, missed family events, only to be dismissed like a child at a fashion show. That moment, under the glare of fluorescent lights and the smell of expensive cologne mixing with my shame, I felt something break inside me. Not my spirit. My patience. He didn't just whisper the insult. He projected it like he was giving a keynote speech. Harold stood up, buttoning his designer suit jacket, making sure everyone was paying attention to his performance. "This is a Fortune 500 company, not a thrift store." His voice echoed off the glass walls. "We have standards here. Appearance matters. If you can't dress like you belong in this building, maybe you don't." Laughter rippled across the table, nervous, uncomfortable laughter, but laughter nonetheless. I stood frozen, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. My hands trembled as I gathered my folders, paper slipping through my fingers. As I walked toward the door, Harold muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe when you can afford real fabric, you'll afford real ideas." More laughter. The sting of perfume, sweat, and humiliation clung to me as I walked out, heels clicking on marble floors that suddenly felt like they were rejecting me too. I didn't know that this humiliation would soon become my greatest weapon. That afternoon, I got the email. Subject: termination of employment. No meeting scheduled. No phone call. No explanation beyond company restructuring. Just a signature from HR and a cold apology that read like it had been copied and pasted 1,000 times before. I sat at my desk for one last hour, pretending to finish tasks while my former colleagues avoided eye contact. Pretending I hadn't been erased from a company I'd helped build. My hand shook as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, 2 years of my life fitting into 12 inches of space. Before I left, I touched my ID badge one last time, feeling the smooth plastic that had represented everything I'd given this company. Security escorted me out like I was a criminal. I whispered to myself as the elevator doors closed, "You'll wish you'd kept me." At home, the silence was deafening. My apartment smelled like burnt lavender candles and stale takeout containers I'd been too busy working to throw away. I dropped the cardboard box by the door and collapsed on my couch. I cried until my reflection in the dark TV screen blurred into nothing. How could someone destroy years of loyalty, dedication, and success with one sentence about a dress? How could fabric matter more than performance? The injustice burned in my chest like acid. But even through the tears, something sharp formed in the pit of my stomach. Not despair. Not defeat. Resolve. Cold, calculated resolve. Harold Crane had made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. I couldn't sleep that night, so I lay in bed remembering. Harold had once praised me, called me the spine of the operations team in front of the entire department. That was 18 months ago, back when I was useful but not threatening. That was before I started gaining recognition from clients directly. Before they started requesting me specifically for projects. Before my name appeared in industry publications. That's when everything changed. The compliments stopped. The criticism started. The mockery began. I realized something important that night: men like Harold don't hate mistakes. They hate competition. They hate women who make them look ordinary. And I had committed the unforgivable sin of being better at his job than he was. The dress was just an excuse. But it would be his downfall. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. I answered hesitantly. "Is this Violet?" a familiar voice asked. "Violet Chen, no, you changed your last name. Violet Sterling now, right?" "This is her," I said carefully. "It's Evelyn Moore. I heard what happened yesterday. Harold's an idiot, but you probably already know that. Listen, I'm in town for 2 days. Let's meet. I think you'll find what I have to say very interesting." Evelyn Moore, legendary executive, retired powerhouse, the woman who'd mentored me during my MBA program. Her tone was cryptic, almost amused. That phone call would change everything. We met at a cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old ambition. Evelyn sat in the corner booth, perfectly composed in a cream suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were private investor reports, shareholder breakdowns, financial statements I shouldn't have access to. Documents that painted a very different picture of Crane Systems International than the public knew. "They think you're gone. They think you're defeated," Evelyn said, sipping her black coffee. "Maybe it's time you show them who you really are." "I don't understand," I said, though my hands were already shaking as I flipped through the pages. Evelyn smiled like a cat with a secret. "Keep reading. You will." The company was struggling financially. The reports showed quarterly losses being hidden through creative accounting. Stock prices were artificially inflated. And most importantly, one major shareholder, an anonymous holding group called Westfield Investments, was quietly selling their shares. "They own 38%, Evelyn explained. Combined with the 12% currently on the open market, and the small holdings scattered among former employees, someone could buy controlling interest. 51%. I laughed nervously, pushing the folder back. "Someone like who? I don't have that kind of money." Evelyn didn't touch the folder. Just looked at me with those sharp eyes that had seen 1,000 corporate battles. "Someone who's tired of being underestimated. Someone who has a late father's inheritance sitting in a trust fund. Someone with connections who owe her favors." My breath caught. She was talking about me. I spent the next 3 days doing nothing but research. My savings account showed $47,000, 2 years of living like a monk while Harold wore $5,000 suits. My father's inheritance trust, which I'd never touched, held another $200,000. Evelyn had connections to private investors who could bridge the gap. The total cost to acquire 51%, based on current market value and the Westfield asking price, would be roughly $800,000. It was possible. Risky, insane, requiring me to bet everything I had and borrow the rest. But it is possible. Every spreadsheet I built, every financial projection I ran, every late-night coffee felt like armor being forged. I was no longer Violet Sterling, a fired employee. I was becoming something else. Something dangerous. I whispered to my laptop screen at 3 a.m. "You fired the wrong woman, Harold." Through Evelyn's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who asked no unnecessary questions, I started acquiring the shares. Piece by piece, quietly, legally, through a holding company we created called Aurora Holdings. The name was deliberate: Aurora, goddess of dawn. A new beginning rising from darkness. Each transaction was a pulse of power. 10,000 shares here. 15,000 there. We moved slowly, carefully, making sure not to trigger any alarms that would alert Harold or the board. The rules required disclosure only when crossing certain thresholds, and we stayed just below them. After 2 weeks, Aurora Holdings owned 18%. After a month, 32%. Nobody noticed. Nobody connected the dots. They were too busy running a failing company to pay attention to the shadows. Harold hosted an investor dinner 6 weeks after firing me. I wasn't invited, obviously, I didn't exist to him anymore. But Evelyn was there, playing her role perfectly as a concerned former board member. She texted me throughout the meal, updates coming in like delicious little victories. Harold sweating. They're asking about the stock movement. Someone just asked who Aurora Holdings is. He has no idea. They're panicking. This is beautiful. I sat in my apartment, drinking wine that tasted like victory, reading each message with growing satisfaction. The smell of Chinese takeout mixed with expensive Merlot, the dinner of someone about to own a company. I smiled at my reflection in the window. Soon. Very soon. The final purchase went through on a Thursday evening in November. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, watching the transaction process. My heart hammered as the confirmation screen loaded. The email from Patricia arrived at 6:47 p.m. Congratulations. Aurora Holdings now controls 51.3% of outstanding shares of Crane Systems International. You are the majority owner. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I'd been holding for 3 months. The cheap navy blue dress hung on my closet door, cleaned and pressed. It had cost me my job. But it had just bought me a company worth $32 million. I poured myself another glass of wine and toasted to the empty room. To buy cheap dresses and expensive lessons. The law required an official notice of ownership change within 5 business days. Patricia filed it on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the company's legal department had called an emergency board meeting to discuss significant ownership changes requiring immediate attention. Harold's assistant, poor girl, she'd always been kind to me, accidentally CC'd me on the distribution list. She didn't know Aurora Holdings was me. The email invited all major shareholders to attend. I replied from my Aurora Holdings email address, confirmed. I will attend. Please ensure adequate seating. That night, I laid out my outfit for the meeting. The same navy blue dress Harold had mocked. I had it professionally tailored, pressed, and perfect. Some weapons hide in plain sight. The morning of the meeting, I woke up at 5 a.m. Showered, did my makeup carefully, styled my hair. Put on the dress that had cost me everything and was about to return it with interest. I looked at myself in the mirror, same woman, same dress, completely different power. I arrived at Crane Systems at exactly 9:55 a.m. for the 10 o'clock meeting. The marble lobby smelled like expensive air freshener and desperation. Security didn't recognize me, I'd been gone for 3 months, and people forget quickly. I walked to the elevator. Pressed the button for the executive floor. My heels clicked on marble that no longer rejected me. Because I owned it. When the elevator doors opened and I stepped into the hallway, Harold was there, coffee in hand. He froze. You're not authorized to be here, he snapped, recovering his composure. Security. I smiled, calm as glass. Oh, I think I am. The conference room was packed. Board members, major investors, company lawyers all seated around the massive table. The same table where I'd been humiliated. The same fluorescent lights. The same smell of burnt coffee. But everything else had changed. Patricia stood at the head of the table with a projector remote. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the recent acquisition of controlling interest by Aurora Holdings. I'll now introduce the principal owner. Harold laughed, actually laughed. This is ridiculous. Who is Aurora Holdings? Some hedge fund trying to. Patricia clicked the remote. My name appeared on the screen in letters 3 feet tall, Violet Sterling, majority shareholder. Harold's face went from red to white in seconds. His coffee cup trembled in his hand. Around the table, 12 people turned to stare at me standing in the doorway. Good morning, I said quietly. Shall we begin? You could hear the hum of the projector. The tick of the wall clock. Someone's phone vibrating against the table. But nobody spoke. They just stared, at me, at Harold, at the screen showing my name, at Patricia's calm expression. One board member, an older gentleman named Frederick, finally broke the silence. Miss Sterling. You were terminated 3 months ago. I agreed, walking to an empty chair. For wearing a cheap dress. Harold felt my appearance didn't meet company standards. So I decided to buy the company instead. It seemed simpler than shopping. A woman at the end of the table, Catherine, the CFO who'd looked away during my humiliation, whispered, She owns us. She owns 51%. Harold stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was a mix of rage and desperation, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Miss Sterling, this is clearly some kind of misunderstanding. We can work this out. Your termination was a mistake, obviously. We can reinstate you immediately, with a promotion, better salary. No, I said simply, not raising my voice. You'll pack your office by end of business today. Effective immediately, your employment with Crane Systems International is terminated. Patricia has prepared your exit paperwork. He looked like a man watching his empire burn. You can't do this. I built this company. I've been here 15 years. And I own it. So yes, I can. I turned to Patricia. Please escort Mr. Crane to HR to complete his exit interview. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. HR drafted his exit papers under my direction. I made sure they used the same cold, corporate language that had been used on me. The same impersonal tone. The same company restructuring excuse that meant nothing and everything. I sat in on his exit interview, it was my right as owner. Harold sat across from the HR director, hands clasped, shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, older, like the costume of authority had been stripped away to reveal the ordinary man beneath. Any comments for your exit interview? The HR director asked, reading from a script. Harold glanced at me. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? That he'd destroyed his own career by mocking a dress? That his ego had cost him everything? He didn't answer. Just signed the papers and left. By the next morning, the headlines had spread across every business news site and trade publication. A fired employee becomes CEO overnight. From termination to takeover, the Violet Sterling story. Revenge served cold, how one woman bought her boss's company. My phone exploded with calls, texts, and emails. Journalists wanted interviews. Former colleagues suddenly remembered we'd been friends. People I'd gone to business school with reached out to reconnect. LinkedIn crashed from the traffic to my profile. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because during my first week reviewing company files with Evelyn, we'd found something interesting. Something that turned this from a simple revenge story into a criminal matter. Harold hadn't just been cruel. He'd been corrupt. The forensic accountant Evelyn recommended was a quiet man named James who wore brown suits and found patterns in numbers the way detectives found clues. He spent 2 weeks analyzing 5 years of company financial records. His report was damning. Harold had been embezzling for at least 3 years. Small amounts at first, then larger. Fake consulting contracts paid to shell companies he controlled. Expense reports for trips that never happened. Equipment purchases that disappeared. Total estimated theft, $1.4 million. He was careful, James explained, showing me spreadsheets highlighted in yellow and red. But not careful enough. The patterns are clear once you know where to look. I stared at the numbers, feeling a cold satisfaction. Harold hadn't just been a bully. He'd been a criminal. And now I had the receipts. Patricia filed criminal charges on Monday. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, the list went on. We also filed civil suits to recover the stolen funds plus damages. The paperwork was 3 inches thick. I didn't do it just for revenge, though that was certainly part of it. I did it for every woman who'd been told she wasn't polished enough for power. For every person dismissed because of appearance rather than ability. For every employee who'd worked late nights while their boss stole from them. When the police served Harold with the warrant at his home on Tuesday morning, he called me. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was shaking. "Violet, please. We can work this out. You can't do this to me. I have a family. A reputation." I saved the message and sent it to Patricia. Then I blocked his number. Within 6 months, Crane Systems was transformed. I renamed it Sterling Solutions. A fresh start required a fresh name. We restructured, eliminated the toxic culture Harold had created, and promoted people based on merit rather than appearance or politics. Catherine, the CFO who'd looked away during my humiliation, came to my office. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I should have said something that day. I was a coward." "Yes, you were," I agreed. "But you have a chance to do better now. Don't waste it." The press called our turnaround the dress rebellion. I called it justice stitched in silk and sealed with stock certificates. Our stock price climbed. Clients returned. Employees who'd left came back. We weren't just surviving. We were thriving. 6 months after taking over, I sat for an interview with a major business magazine. The reporter was a young woman who reminded me of myself before Harold's cruelty. "What would you say to Harold Crane if you saw him today?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. I could have said many things. I could have been cruel, could have gloated, could have twisted the knife. But that would make me like him. Instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you. You made me rich. You made me powerful. And you taught me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the best thing that could have happened." The reporter smiled. That quote would become the headline. At the next annual gala, the first under Sterling Solutions' name, I wore a custom gown designed by a young, up-and-coming designer who'd been rejected by fashion houses for not being traditional enough. The gown was made of navy blue silk, cut in the exact same style as the dress Harold had mocked. It cost $8,000. I didn't care about the price. I cared about the statement. When guests asked about it, I told them the story. Every detail. The humiliation, the firing, the revenge, the takeover. And when they asked how much the gown cost, I smiled and said, about 51%. The laughter this time was genuine. Warm. Mine. The ballroom smelled of champagne and victory, and I owned both. 8 months after taking over, I passed Harold outside the courthouse. His criminal trial had ended with a guilty verdict, 3 years in minimum security prison and full restitution of the stolen funds. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His family had left him. He looked smaller, older, and broken. When he saw me, he stopped walking. We stood on the courthouse steps, November wind whipping around us. "You really did it," he said quietly. Not angry, not bitter. Just resigned. "You actually destroyed me." I adjusted my coat, navy blue, naturally, and looked at him for a long moment. "No, Harold. I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself the moment you confused cruelty with leadership. I just made sure everyone else could see it too." "I'm sorry," he said. "For what it's worth now." "I'm sorry." "It's worth exactly what it's always been worth." "Nothing." I started walking past him, then paused. "But Harold?" "Thank you. You taught me that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones most afraid of your potential." That lesson was priceless. As I walked away, the wind brushed against my navy blue coat, the same color as the dress he'd mocked. And for the first time since that humiliating Monday morning, it felt exactly like what it was, armor. The dress didn't make me weak. His cruelty didn't break me. And his biggest mistake didn't destroy me. It freed me. Sometimes the worst thing someone can do to you is the best gift they'll ever give you. You just have to be strong enough to unwrap it and use it as fuel. I owned a multi-million-dollar company. I had power, respect, success. But more than that, I had proved that cheap dresses and expensive revenge can both be priceless, depending on who's wearing them.